This is 22 Hours, a second look. And in the new content at the end of this episode, you'll hear the final portion of my conversation with the prosecutors in this case, Laura Bach and Chris Bruckman. In this portion of our discussion, we get into the investigation, how they worked with police, their theories on Daron's alibi, and the photos that never made it into evidence, and how this case altered their perspectives on life. Episode 13 was our first extra episode in the original release of the podcast that came more than 2 years after the conviction, and it's somewhat informal. Here's episode 13, The Appeal. Are you having flashbacks from this music? It's not just to tell you there's a new episode of 22 Hours. There's been a fairly big update in the case, and it actually has to do with this very song. First, let's acknowledge it's been a while. We wrapped up our last episode at the end of August 2019. In the nearly year and a half since then, a lot has happened. The coronavirus, the George Floyd protests over racial justice over the summer, the election, the storming of the Capitol last week. But even though it's been some time since our last episode, we want to come to you because we have an update in this case. Daron Wint's new attorneys in the D.C. Public Defender Service have filed a legal brief in his case asking an appeals court judge to throw out Daron's conviction and requesting a new trial. This happened just a few days before Christmas 2020. There's a lot that's still up in the air, though. We don't have the prosecutor's response to this filing, but it could be a while before we get that. It took the defense nearly 2 years from Daron's sentencing to file this appeal paperwork. But this is just the way the justice system works, in small, sometimes barely perceptible steps. Long after the media glare has faded, piece by piece, document by document, the system moves forward. And though it's only one step in what will likely be years more before Daron Wint's case is closed, it's the first movement since his sentencing. And we know there's been a great deal of interest in this case. So what's the basis for the appeal? Why should Daron Wint, who prosecutors said committed one of the most heinous crimes in the history of D.C., get a new trial? It goes back to this song, Haters Hate, which you know goes to the heart of Daron Wint's whereabouts on May 13th and 14th of 2015. We learned more about Daron toward the end of the trial. It was the week after Daron took the stand and accused his brothers of killing Sava, Amy, and Philip Savopoulos and Vera Figueroa inside the family's home on Woodland Drive. When he testified, you'll remember that Daron laid out this long, complicated story of how he thought he was going to the Savopoulos house to finish a painting and drywall job with Daron. He said he thought his 2 younger brothers, Daron and Stefan, borrowed his van the day before for the job, and he told prosecutors without a way to get home, he stayed the night at Ed's house. It was after Daron took the stand that prosecutors, in what's known as the rebuttal phase, called Daron to testify. That was a surprise. We'd gone through the whole trial wondering where Daron was and if we would hear from him. Okay, just to briefly recap, here's what Daron said when he took the stand. He said on May 13th, the day the Savopoulos family and Vera Figueroa were taken captive, that he'd gone to PCM Services to fill out an application for a job to paint a dorm at George Washington University in D.C. Then he'd gone to his friend Anthony Anderson's house in Gaithersburg, Maryland, to watch the music video Anthony helped shoot for a song called Haters Hate that he was planning to drop that very day.
Watch them haters hate, they get mad, I'm so flat today. Every time I hit the streets, I bet the freaks cooperate. Yes, you know they call me Mr. Mode, I do not contemplate. I see, I want, I cry, I get that just the way I operate.
Both Daron and Anthony testified they couldn't remember the actual day Daron came over to watch that music video, but they did remember it was the day Anthony released the Haters Hate video on YouTube. And sure enough, prosecutors pulled up a screenshot from YouTube showing Haters Hate was uploaded on May 13th, 2015. On the day the Savopoulos family and Vera Figueroa were taken captive on Woodland Drive, this evidence presented by the prosecutors showed that Daron Wint was 20 miles away in suburban Maryland. So here's where Daron's appeal comes in. There was another witness who was at Anthony Anderson's house the day they gathered to watch the new video on YouTube. Anthony's cousin, a woman named Ikea Williams, was also there. In the spring of 2015, she was living with Anthony at the house in Gaithersburg. In fact, it was her house, and Anthony sort of came and went, she said. She was friendly with Darrell, too. Now, Ikea Williams didn't testify during Daron's trial. This is why it's the first time you're hearing of her. But she did testify before the grand jury back in 2015, which then indicted Daron on the murder charges. That's where this information comes from, that she was in the house, her grand jury testimony. She says she remembers Darrell coming over sometime in May 2015 and watching Anthony's new music video. She didn't remember the exact day either, but she says Darrell usually called or texted to say he was outside the door, and she said that she was pretty sure that's what he had done that day. That's when Daron's lawyers pounced, because her phone records showed the only call or text between the two of them in May 2015 was a text message on May 19th. The defense said, sure, maybe Darrell stopped by Anthony's house to watch Haters Hate, but it was nearly a week after the murders, not an alibi for the day the victims were taken hostage. The problem for the defense was prosecutors never called Ikea Williams to testify during the trial. She was on the list of witnesses that prosecutors said they'd planned to call, and the defense was apparently banking on that. They'd already rested their case at this point. But at the last minute, prosecutors decided not to call Ikea Williams as a witness. As Anthony Anderson was testifying, Assistant U.S. Attorney Chris Bruckman passed a note to Laura Bach. They agreed Anthony Anderson's memory of that day was strong enough that they didn't need to call Ikea Williams. He held up, Laura Bach, the prosecutor, told the judge to explain why they hadn't called Ikea Williams. She said, everything we needed came in. This whole thing about prosecutors not calling Ikea Williams, it actually came up during the trial. We could tell the lawyers were arguing about something that seemed significant, but sitting in the courtroom gallery that day, we couldn't get the full picture. The lawyers went up to the bench to make their case to the judge after the jury had filed out of the courtroom. And at times we heard them raise their voices, but it was far enough away that we couldn't really make out what was at issue. We knew the passion wasn't for the jury's benefit. They weren't there. But it was clear Judy Pipe and Laura Bach were adamant in their body language and their raised voices, apparently citing all these legal precedents to make their case. Also, this was all going on during what was technically a break in the courtroom. So not only was the jury out, but there were also people coming in and out of the courtroom. And oddly enough, there was some kind of construction going on in a neighboring courtroom, and this hammering noise was bleeding over into our courtroom. So, yeah, a dramatic courtroom scene from A Few Good Men or fill in the blank. This was not that. Anyway, we could tell based on what led up to the break that the attorneys were arguing over calling an additional witness named Ikea Williams, who might complicate Darrell's alibi. The judge denied it pretty quickly, and then the court moved on to closing arguments. That's why it's really only now that we have transcripts on this exchange that we can put it into context. The defense wanted to question Ikea Williams because they thought her account of that day could weaken Darrell's alibi that put him in Gaithersburg at a friend's house the morning of May 13th, when prosecutors say Amy, Philip, and Vera were being taken hostage. Her testimony could rebut Darrell's account of where he said he was, and it could also contradict Anthony Anderson's testimony, recalling that Darrell was at his house that day. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Quince. Step into the holiday season with layers made to feel good, look polished, and last from Quince. Perfect for gifting or keeping for yourself. Go to quince.com/nightmares for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada, too. That's QUINCE.com/nightmares to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/nightmares. Daron's lead defense attorney, Judy Pipe, said since the prosecution hadn't called Ikea Williams, as they had indicated they would, she hadn't gotten a chance to cross-examine her, and she wanted that chance. Judy Pipe asked the judge for one more phase of the trial known as Sir Rebuttal, so that the defense could call Ikea Williams for themselves. Prosecutor Laura Bach was aghast. She said if Ikea Williams was so critical to the defense, they should have called her when they were presenting their case, not depended on the prosecution to do so. Basically, she was saying they lost their chance. And Laura Bach said providing an alibi for Darrell was not part of the prosecution's case, that accounting for Darrell's whereabouts on May 13th only became relevant after Daron took the stand and accused his brothers of the killings. But Judy Pipe was unrelenting, and we saw this on her face that day. The transcript shows she responded that the defense had a right to call Ikea Williams, a witness that they said would contradict Anthony Anderson's testimony. Quote, "I dare to say this is probably the most critical issue in the trial. If the jury believes that Darrell Wint was at the home of Ikea Williams and Anthony Anderson in those morning hours, instead of where Daron Wint says he was, we lose." Her argument did not sway the judge. Judge Juliet McKenna said Ikea Williams' statements would not have directly contradicted Anthony Anderson's. She said they were, quote, equivocal. She was making the point that Ikea Williams' recollection of what Darrell would have done, "I believe he called me," or "he usually does," was not so definitive. And the judge also said this was not a new matter, legally speaking. She said, and again, this is straight from the transcript, quote, "If I'm to interpret, as defense counsel's asking me to, that this somehow is new evidence or new matters, trials would never end. We would just continue to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth because the whole reason we have this trial is that the government's evidence is different from the defense's evidence. So that would be a never-ending cycle of witnesses coming through." She said Darrell's whereabouts were not a new issue. Quote, "The defense squarely puts Darrell Wint's whereabouts on May 13th and 14th at issue in its defense case. When prosecutors called Darrell to the stand in their rebuttal case, they were attempting to rebut what was introduced in the defense case. The judge said other cases where defendants successfully won the right to an extra phase of the trial, a surrebuttal phase, was when there was an element of surprise, where a witness testified in a way that the defense never would have expected or could have accounted for. But in this case, the judge said, it was the defense who made Darrell's whereabouts a key part of the case since they were accusing him of being the real culprit. This is the heart of the defense's appeal, that the judge's decision on this was wrong as a matter of law. In the legal brief that Daron's lawyers filed, they said Ikea Williams' testimony would have, quote, seriously undermined part of Darrell's alibi and, quote, strongly cast doubt on his version of events. Doubt that in the jury's mind could have affected the verdict. It says by not allowing Judy Pipe to present the surrebuttal case, quote, it robbed the defense of presenting a powerful piece of evidence that Darrell did indeed have the opportunity to commit the offenses and that he was lying about his whereabouts on May 13th.
I know the game fucked up, but it's a 9 for a 9. I know the game fucked up, but it's a 9 for a 9.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I hear you now.
Haha. Jack's in the other room right now, or in the newsroom, and I'm closing our studio door because we have to socially distance.
It's the world we live in.
Hi, Jack Moore. We're back again.
Indeed.
Although we weren't entirely surprised, we have to say, because we knew that Daron Wint's attorneys would be appealing. I mean, Judy Pipe told us that they were going to be appealing, but we just didn't know when.
Right. And they had filed the paperwork. Basically, they file a notice of appeal that says, we will be appealing this. And then it takes months. They compile the transcripts. So they have to order all the transcripts as well. And then they get several deadlines of when they have to file this legal brief. And it had been extended, probably 6 or 7 times.
Okay, so we should say when we saw Judy Pipe and Laura Bach sort of like squaring off over this issue at the bench, we couldn't hear what they were saying. We were sort of in the back of the courtroom, as you've already heard. And it wasn't the first or the last time that they had taken a dispute up to the bench to be resolved with the judge. And we said in one of our previous episodes, we knew that Daron was appealing. We specifically didn't know what the appeal was going to be.
When they were arguing about this at the bench, it was, kind of coming toward the end of the trial and, that was vociferous in the moment. And then it seemed to be over and done with. The judge denied the surrebuttal request and then move on. Except, it's not exactly case closed because here we are talking about it in the appeal.
Yeah, I just think it's sort of like as a listener to this podcast, you're like, who the heck is this person? I've listened to this whole podcast and I've never heard her name. Well, she never testified. And we didn't know, honestly, that this was going to be at issue. So it's sort of interesting that we're introducing a new character with this appeal. But yeah, sometimes that's the way it goes. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with HelloFresh. HelloFresh has doubled its menu to 100 options a week and offers bigger portions that will keep everyone satisfied. And you can savor the season with the hearty fall recipes like classic beef chili or honey glazed pork tenderloin. The best way to cook just got better. Go to HelloFresh.com/nightmares10FM now to get 10 free meals and a free breakfast for life. One per box with active subscription. Free meals applied to discount on first box. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. That's HelloFresh.com/nightmares10FM to get 10 free meals and a free breakfast for life. Okay, so let's go into the legal basis for this appeal and kind of break this down.
So the judge's reasoning for why she said the defense shouldn't get this extra phase of the trial was for two reasons. And the one is like much easier to understand. Does Ikea Williams' testimony rebut what the prosecution said in the rebuttal phase? Mm-hmm. So is it actually rebuttal evidence? And then also, is this actually a new matter? So maybe if we start with the rebuttal part, because what the defense says is that, yes, this does rebut because the judge actually interpreted Ikea Williams' grand jury testimony, kind of misinterpreted it, because the judge said that Ikea Williams' testimony was equivocal, that sometimes Daron texted or called. Usually he did. But if you actually read word for word in the grand jury testimony, Ikea Williams said on that day that he came over and we watched Haters Hate, Daron texted or called.
Okay, so I'm looking at the transcript now, page 11 of Ikea Williams' grand jury testimony. So I'm just going to read it so you guys can hear word for word. So this is Laura Bach asking her the question, and she says, all right, did he either text you or call you prior to coming to your house? Ikea Williams says, he texted me. Daron did? Yes. And when he was outside of your house, did he text you or call you, as best as you can recall? I believe he called me and told me he was at the door. And he wouldn't have called you on... They give the number, but we'll leave it out here. Ikea Williams responds, yes. And why do you think he called you to let you know he was at the door? It could have been because I was upstairs, but, Anthony was downstairs. But he usually does that. Like, if he's at the door, he'll tell me. He won't knock. He'll just tell me he's at the door, and I'll just open it. He'll just say, I'm outside? Mm-hmm. Is that a yes? Yes, I'm sorry. And that's it. But it's funny because initially she says he texted me, and then 10 seconds later she says, I believe he called me and told me he was at the door. So there is a little bit of question there. So they're saying, reading the actual words of the transcript, this is rebuttal evidence. By the way, for those who aren't as familiar with the word equivocal, it sort of means like open to interpretation, ambiguous, questionable.
But the thing is, in the brief that the defense attorneys filed, they said even if her statements are open to more than one interpretation, that it should have been for the jury to decide what the true interpretation is, not the judge.
You know what I sort of thought was interesting, and tell me if this is the right time to raise this, but during Anthony Anderson's testimony, when Chris Bruckman hands Laura Bach the note that says, basically, we don't need to call Ikea Williams because we got it. Doesn't that indicate to you that there was a possibility that they weren't going to get what they need from Anthony Anderson? He wasn't going to be, give them the detail that they needed to prove to the jury that Daron was there. So I guess my point is, you don't know what would have happened if Ikea Williams was called to the stand. Because they didn't know what was going to happen when Anthony Anderson was called to the stand. There were obviously questions in their mind if he was going to give them enough. Then they end up passing this note in the middle of his testimony saying, we got it. We don't need to call her. But she could have gotten up and said and been more definitive or been less. We don't know. Well, it wasn't a slam dunk.
I am 95% certain that somewhere here in these transcripts, it says that Anthony Anderson did not go before the grand jury. So in a sense, the prosecution wasn't quite sure what they were going to get out of him in terms of how clear his memory was going to be. And the thing is that the whole reason why Ikea Williams was on the prosecution witness list is because they saw her as cumulative to Daron's alibi, meaning that the whole point about on the morning of May 13th, where he was, he said he was in Gaithersburg. He was at Anthony Anderson's house watching Haters Hate. Mm-hmm. Ikea Williams is all cumulative to that. The only question is, well, what day was it for certain? And she doesn't remember, but she says usually he called or texted, and she was pretty sure he did on this day. So to the prosecution point of view, that's 90% in alignment with what Anthony Anderson said, with what Daron said. The 10% is exactly what day it was.
Right, which was the part that Anthony Anderson and Darrell were a little fuzzy on in their testimony, because they said it was the haters hate day, that the day the video dropped, but they couldn't remember the day, like the date or the time or anything like that.
Right. And then, and I don't know if this is the time to bring up the second tier of the appeal, which is the judge said this wasn't a new matter, and what that means legally.
And essentially, right? Yeah, we're not attorneys, but we've read this thing, and as you guys know, we know the details of this case. Although we did have to reacquaint ourselves because it's been a minute since we did our podcast. But the new matter thing is essentially the judge was saying, we've already been over this. The defense brought up Darrell's whereabouts to start with. You guys are the ones who introduced him as being, the potential culprit in this.
So this is one where I can really see both. I can see both sides, because what the prosecution said and what the judge agreed to when she denied the defense their surrebuttal was Darrell's alibi writ large was at issue. His whereabouts were at issue throughout the whole trial, because on day one, the defense said Darrell did this. So broadly speaking, they made his whereabouts relevant. And then in the rebuttal case, the prosecution came in and provided an alibi for him.
So you'd think if you were the defense, you'd immediately want to pull and call as many people as you could to substantiate any evidence you had that he wasn't in Gaithersburg when he said he was watching that video.
Right. But the thing is, this actual specifics of where Darrell was not raised until rebuttal. I mean, that's just a statement of fact. Darrell did not testify in the case in chief of the prosecution. So this one is one that I think the lawyers will have to decide, because I could, from a layperson's perspective, I could see both sides.
This podcast is sponsored in part by Aura Frames. Do you find yourself needing a pick-me-up in the middle of the day, or maybe when you're about to head into a meeting or make a call you'd rather not make? We all do. And for me, Aura is an easy pick-me-up that works every time. Seeing a short video of my nephews when they were toddlers, or my parents dancing, or a photo from my wedding brings a smile to my face and reminds me of why I'm working so hard. I have a digital frame at home, and I've gifted one as well because of that happy feeling it constantly delivers. Aura frames hold unlimited free photos and videos. You just download the Aura app and then connect it to Wi-Fi. You can preload photos if you want to give it as a gift, and then they can send photos to the frame straight from their phones. You can't wrap togetherness, but this holiday, you can frame it. For a limited time, visit auraframes.com and get $45 off Aura's best-selling Carver matte frames, named #1 by Wirecutter, by using promo code NIGHTMARES at checkout. That's AURA frames.com, promo code NIGHTMARES. This exclusive Black Friday Cyber Monday deal is their best of the year, so order now before it ends. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. It was interesting too. So in the appeal, it says the matter was first raised by the government in its rebuttal case. The case law allowed him to present his contrary evidence as a matter of right. Even if this court disagrees and finds that Williams' testimony did not go to such a new matter, the trial court should have allowed or denied surrebuttal subject to the court's sound exercise of discretion, as opposed to what the judge did here, erect a blanket rule that surrebuttal was impermissible as a matter of law. And that's, that is kind of legalese, but basically they're saying discretion was needed and discretion wasn't given.
Right. So that's kind of like their other thing in their back pocket. So if the appeals court judge says this isn't necessarily a new matter, they can say, even if it's not technically new, the judge was supposed to consider everything and then make a decision. And instead, in the language of her ruling issued from the bench, it was pretty cut and dry, saying, as a matter of law, she didn't think the defense was entitled. And they said this, and this is again to the legalese, but in the appeal, it says, a failure to exercise discretion in a matter requiring discretion is itself an abuse of discretion.
Sorry.
But but I think that, gets to, there's a number of prongs that the defense is clearly raising here.
Right. And the last one being that it wasn't going to take that much time. I mean, they were saying, the judge has the quote where she says, we could be here, just go back and forth, essentially saying, you can't just let testimony go on and on and on. At some point, this has to end. Their response to that is, yeah, but we only wanted to call one person. it wasn't going to go on and on and on. So they kind of challenged that part of her ruling as well.
Yes, and they cite this fascinating case that I was trying to do a little bit of extra research on out of Mississippi, and it's a 1981 Mississippi Supreme Court case. It was a manslaughter case. The guy was convicted, and it was undisputed that this guy named Larry Edge had killed another man. Mm-hmm. But Edge said that he did so because the other guy had a knife to Edge's wife's throat and she was literally in his clutches, and so he shot the guy. And as a result, his wife's coat was covered in blood. And she testified that her coat was covered in blood, and that was evidence to the defense that this guy was literally on top of her and, threatening her harm.
Right.
In rebuttal, the prosecution presented evidence from a sheriff and two other people who said after the shooting, they didn't see any blood on this woman's coat. So the defense then wanted to have a brief surrebuttal case where they called one additional witness who saw the wife right after the shooting and said she did have blood on her coat.
Mm-hmm. So same thing. It's just one additional witness.
Right. And the judge rejected. And the phrasing that this judge used is very similar to the judge in the Wint case. The judge in this Mississippi case said, if they had this additional phase of the trial, it would be, quote, continual testimony, and we would never get out of here. Now, this case was appealed to the Mississippi Supreme Court in 1981, and they said fundamental fairness and due process required that Larry Edge be allowed to call the one additional witness. So I think it's very interesting that even the language is very similar. Now, I can't find what ended up happening in his new trial,
how it actually ended up.
Yeah.
I think in the end, just pulling back a little bit, what is this appeal really saying, right? I mean, is this the smoking gun? No. Jack, can you explain? This is less really about what Ikea Williams had to say and more about the larger idea of the process and whether Daron got a fair trial.
Right. Yeah. I think the substance of what she's saying matters to some extent because the defense says it would have created doubt about Darrell's alibi. But at the end of the day, the appeals court is not going to hear this appeal and then, declare Daron is innocent and Darrell is guilty. What they're looking at is the process, and the process kept Ikea Williams from testifying. And was that enough to have changed the outcome? If the jury had heard Ikea Williams testifying and believed that it may have contradicted what Darrell was saying and that was swirling around their head when they deliberating, would the jury have come to a different conclusion?
Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see how long this takes, to be honest with you guys. I mean, we could be coming to you in a couple months. We could be coming back to you and updating you in a year, because given how long it took for them to file this appeal, the government technically has until, I think it's the end of February to respond. But the chances of them getting an extension on that, given the fact that the defense had a huge extension, is pretty good.
And, because it's been a while, some things have changed. Some of the people that you've heard of throughout this podcast have new jobs, new roles. So we thought this would be a good time to, kind of update.
So where are they now?
Well, one thing, just to start off with, so Daron Wint has all new attorneys. They're still through the DC Public Defender Service, but they have attorneys that work specifically on appeals. So he has three attorneys that are arguing this case now.
Right. And Judy Pipe is no longer handling Daron's case. In fact, she's no longer working for the Public Defender Service at all. She's now a judge herself. She was nominated and named a magistrate judge in DC Superior Court last year. And she's working mainly in criminal and domestic violence court, presiding over temporary civil protection orders, arraignments, hearings. But yeah, Judy Pipe's a judge.
It's kind of interesting, seeing some local news coverage here in DC to see her name as a judge.
Yeah.
And now deciding these matters, when defendants should be held, when they shouldn't, it's kind of an interesting change of roles.
And Jack, Laura Bach, who was the lead prosecutor, is still at the U.S. Attorney's Office for D.C.
Yes, and she actually is now the deputy chief of the office's homicide division, where she oversees the prosecution of murders in the city. It's a very, kind of important role and high profile, depending on, the cases that come before her desk.
Yeah, we have a case we're following in D.C. now of a 10-year-old little girl who was shot and killed, and I've been covering that case. And there are 11 people being tried, but 10 of them in connection with the killing. And she's actually overseeing two groups of people going to two separate trials because there's so many defendants. So it's an interesting case.
And of course, the court system, like court systems all throughout the country, has been totally rocked by the coronavirus pandemic. Jury trials in DC are on hold. Things are still proceeding, with other kind of matters and legal arguments, and things are being filed and they're having remote hearings, but things are really kind of tied up. And in fact, if people remember, we had made this big request to get audio recordings of the trial. And, it was something that had never been done. And even the existence of the audio recordings was not widely known of trials in DC Superior Court. And we got the chief judge to agree to look at the matter and to, study it and begin to move in that direction possibly. And we've been hearing that, they are looking into it. They've, convened panels and fingers crossed, it looks like it might be heading that way. But, the justice system has its own tempo. And then, of course, with the coronavirus pandemic, it's just kind of slowed everything down. The last update is they're still looking at it.
And we got the most, I guess, hopeful update right before the pandemic hit. And then it was kind of back burner. So we're hoping to hear more soon. So that's our update, guys. We will, of course, bring you more when we have it, and hopefully it comes soon. But everyone stay safe, stay well, and thanks again for listening. Thanks for listening to episode 13, The Appeal. Now to the second portion of my conversation with the prosecutors in this case, Laura Bach and Chris Bruckman. We met in a conference room at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., and to remind you, the three of us had a prior conversation that was not recorded, which we reference from time to time during the interview. We're talking now about the investigation. This case was packed with unique evidence. Because not only did you have the crime scene that was set on fire, then you have the contamination of that crime scene with firefighters and different people coming through. Then we have a car that's set on fire miles away. Then we have another car that's set on fire. Phones that were either deliberately left behind or turned off. And then there's a lack of surveillance evidence, which is so interesting because we have people write us, well, why didn't they just check the Ring cameras or the neighbors' cameras that were pointed at the street? Not only is that part of the street, there's no entrances there, which is interesting.
Right. It's a very quiet residential neighborhood, but you also have to remember this was before everybody and their brother had a Ring camera.
Yes, but just before. When it was still when really rich people and really well-to-do people had the phone line kind of security system.
The old security systems. And the Savopoulos family had a really good security system. And, that's one of the things that's just so sad about this. It's clear that they were doing everything they could to keep their family safe. It was just not working quite right at that moment. It was but it wasn't being recorded live. Like they weren't monitoring it. Yes, thank you.
Because you were saying every time a glass dropped or keys fell,
it would go off.
Sound off.
So they had cut off the alarm system, and so it wasn't being stored in the cloud at that time. And so they had it all on a big DVR backup, and that did get taken. But if it had been a different week, even there's a likelihood that it could have caught it. But the other thing people need to think about is when you have a Ring camera, usually people are worried about breaking into their own homes, right? Mm-hmm. And so usually the cameras are focused on your doorway. So even if, across the street somebody had a Ring camera, it doesn't always pick up what's happening at your neighbors.
You mentioned in our last conversation, Laura, that the best thing that could have happened as far as from an evidentiary point of view is that it was set on fire.
Yes. Absolutely.
Can you explain that?
So, in DC, everybody's got their own jurisdiction. The Metropolitan Police Department is responsible for all homicides in the district. But there is an arson task force that has members of the ATF, members of Prince George's County Police, MPD, and they work together whenever there's an arson. By setting this house on fire, yes, significant evidence was destroyed, but it brought in all of these resources that we may not have had access to. The ATF swarms in, Prince George's County, everybody is on that scene contributing, and you just don't always get that. So the biggest mistake he made was setting the house on fire.
We had someone write in and say, what doesn't square with me, and I share the sentiment, is the passion of the crime from someone who didn't know the family very well, ostensibly. And I wonder if that bothers you, if that's ever something that you felt like you had to sort of address to the jury, because the manner in which we think that they were killed and with the objects we know were used, it doesn't seem like it was somebody who knew him 10 years ago. I mean, was there ever something that we were ever looking for? Did their paths cross again? Or was there ever any kind of further investigation into why did he pick them, or why did he care so much about the Savopoulos?
So absolutely, there was investigation as to where their paths could have crossed, and there still is no answer for that specifically. I mean, what we do know from the trial is that Sava regularly jumped around to different job sites. We also know that Daron was out of work and may have picked up work here or there. So it is possible he saw him at that point. You can find anybody with a computer. It's not hard to just put their name in and get an address. So I think that's certainly easy enough. But if you listen, I know we played them at sentencing. There were some voicemails that Daron left for his brother or his sister. He was angry that he had been put out of the house. And when you listen to his tone in those voicemails, how he just goes from what I would consider normal to just off the charts psychotic. He does it so quickly, and the anger and the things he's saying about his family members, I think it makes it a little more understandable that he's the type of person that could just have that rage.
The other thing that I just want to make sure we get to people's questions was that all of this for $40,000 ? It was like, for most people, anybody with who's rational, that's not even...
Sure.
I was about to say it's not enough to kill someone, but it's just like, that doesn't even make sense to even say out loud. But it's just such a small amount of money, and the brutality of the crime, it doesn't make sense. But it's not like Daron necessarily, we don't know that Daron was really running this. It makes sense to me that Sava said, this is the amount of money I can get you without this flagging someone on the other side to, whoa, something must be going on, because this is a lot of money to drop off.
Sure, I think you also have a vehicle that maybe he thought he was going to take. There was also lots of, that was a beautiful home. There were things within the home he certainly could have taken. But people are killed every day for so much less than $40,000. I guess the only thing I would say is, if you try to figure out why people do what they do, you'll never go to sleep. People are killed for $10 sometimes, and so $40,000 may have been all he needed, or he could have thought he was going to get more from the vehicles or the jewelry in the house or anything else.
Obviously, you can't put yourself in his mind. It just was one of those things, I think, that bothers people. It's like, you thought you're going to get millions probably, and you did this, and then you walked away with 40 grand. It's just...
It's something we confront in many homicide trials, and Glenn Kirshner actually, I remember, taught me when I was a young homicide prosecutor. The line is, murder doesn't make sense. And you tell that to the jury, because if they're trying to make sense of what the defendant did, they're asking the wrong questions. Murder doesn't make sense.
It has to be asked, was there ever any point in the investigation that you thought more than one person was involved in this?
Well, Laura addressed that in her closing.
Yeah.
Right.
She talked about if the jury was going to be back in that jury room trying to figure out, was it one person or two, they would be there for 3 years, however many months, she had, I think, down to the hour in her closing of exactly how long she had been working on this case. And it was a great way to convey to the jury that we aren't certain. Like, we have our individual theories, but we aren't certain. We don't know for certain whether there was somebody else in there or not. And that wasn't what the jury was tasked with finding out.
Right. And that was really a huge point, I think, because it just was very crystal clear the way you said it. It doesn't have to be that you think other people were involved. It has to be, do you know that he was involved?
Right. And I said, I think to them that, look, 10 years from now, even if evidence came forward that someone else was involved, we would investigate it and try to prosecute that individual. That was true back then. It's true now. But that evidence has not presented itself.
Did you ever have any leads or evidence that were not admissible that you wanted to get in? Chris, you mentioned the voice memo, or was it a text?
So I think it was a search on the phone And it was funny. I really didn't actually realize the significance of it until I listened to the first part of the podcast. It was shortly after the murder had happened, and I think before there's any news of it, there's an entry on Daron Wynn's phone that says something like Savage Frontman dies or Savage Vocalist dies, something like that. And I remember just looking at it, and the fact that it started with S and it had dies in it, and the time when it's happening, I was like, there's something going on here. And I think you guys tried to sort of like type in on a phone something about, the Savopoulos dying or Savopoulos family dying, and you got auto-corrected to whatever the entry on his phone was. Yeah. That was kind of hysterical when I heard that, but I don't think there's any way we could have gotten that in. It's too much speculation. I think the judge would have looked at us and said, that's cute, Mr. Bruckman, but try something else.
I think she would have said that. I think she would have.
But Judge, just type it into your phone and see what it does.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, but there was nothing else that you guys, evidence that you wanted to get in, or something that just was shut down. It seems like you had a lot of evidence sort of to mark on the timeline.
Sure.
Even Claudia taking that picture, like out, outside the house of the car.
Right.
Just little things like that.
Even the deleted photos from his phone. That's something that, we used to great effect after he gave this story about he was in a house with no Wi-Fi. Well, on his phone were about a dozen photographs that were taken during the course of the kidnapping while the family is being held in the home.
They were deleted.
And they were deleted. And we weren't able to restore them. We had, one of the best people we know. Oh, I know.
Oh my gosh. To know that you have that could be right there. And
yeah.
Oh.
So we had an absolutely phenomenal forensic expert, John Marsh, look at it. And sometimes things are just not recoverable. And what was recoverable was the fact that there were photos taken, when they were taken, the file numbers that were associated with them, and that they were deleted.
Right.
But he had to change his story because of that, because that wasn't consistent with what he had first spun. And I think the jury sort of got like the idea that photos were taken and deleted while this is all happening. Just that, is something else showing that he was involved.
I'm like, ask that. Really quickly, because I know this isn't a big part of the case, but for some reason people keep getting hung up on the GW aspect of this, on where the van was parked and the traffic cameras, and did they go through all the traffic cameras to try and find the blue van? My colleague made a really good point, is you notice a sports car that's rushing down New York Avenue. You don't notice the blue minivan that's parked, even in the Savopoulos' neighborhood, because you could argue that there are more people there who are working on houses and housekeepers and roofers or whatever it is, landscapers, than there are people who live in that neighborhood.
Sure.
So it didn't stand out. Was it difficult to try to lay in that part of the timeline, the 24th and K?
So it is hard to find a blue minivan. It's not as hard to find a blue minivan being towed. And so we were able to find it going outbound, out of the city, being towed, and you could kind of backtrack after that. But again, this is one of those questions that, we don't have an answer for. I would love an answer for, why, what was it, 24th and K? Is that what was typed into your phone?
Yep.
Why did you type 24th and K into your phone? Why would you park it down there? Is it just a part of the city you know? Do you have a friend down there? And how do you not get a parking ticket down there, right? I don't know. But these are things that, go through your mind that you try to get answers to. But again, everybody came out, all law enforcement, Maryland, DC, everybody, all of those cameras were at our disposal. People were watching them nonstop, and we could not figure that one out. We tried, but we didn't.
It's good to hear that, though.
Yeah.
I mean, not that anyone doubted you tried, but it's like people have this idea, wait, what if they looked at the traffic cameras? It's like, no, they did. They looked at the
No, and I will go back to what I said before. My colleague Emily Miller turned over every stone. I promise you, every stone that anybody could possibly think of, she looked under it.
I need to interview Emily. No.
She followed every lead until it stopped. She looked at everything.
She even got the results of the lotto winnings in New York to show that he did not win the lotto, which had been his explanation for how he had the cash at one point, was that he had won the lottery. And they track if you win more than, I think it's like $600, and he claimed he won like 10 grand. And so we had proof that he did not win the lottery and that was a lie. I mean, not that anyone was going to believe in the midst of everything else that's happening that he won the lottery.
Right.
But that is the length that she went to.
Right.
It was part of the narrative in court that when Daron saw the security camera pointed at him when he opened the front door to pick up the pizza box, that was sort of the moment that this turned from perhaps a robbery gone wrong to a killing. I'm wondering if you can share with me what you think. I mean, was that the moment, or do you think that this was always the plan to have killed these people? Or I don't know. It's
I don't know how you can get in. I mean, again, you go back to how do you get into someone's head? I mean, how do you ever think that this is going to turn out well for you? To take 4 people hostage without a mask on, so everybody sees your face. You're with them for 22 hours. They can clearly tell who you are.
And to call Sava to the house.
Right.
I mean, to call them back in and then to turn other people away. It seems like it just is confounding. What was the plan? Was there ever a plan?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the pizza delivery and seeing the security camera changed the overall plan. What it triggered was the calls about the security system.
Right.
And trying to get, assurances from the security company that nothing was being recorded to the cloud and that in the house was the only way it was. And I think that's really more Sava than Daron. That is Sava trying to prove to him, you're not being recorded anywhere. Right. You can get away with this. You can let us go. I can prove to you you can get away with this. So I think that's really more about Sava than about Daron.
I mean, I do think that's accurate. I think that the fact that it took 22 hours, I think a lot of that is credited to the adults, the people who were in that house. I think holding it together and everything else, you can just imagine that if they were losing it or screaming or they didn't do those things. They held it together, and it's pretty clear that they were doing everything, Sava in particular, to keep his family alive.
The phone calls are chilling. I mean, it's just like, how could you possibly sound normal to family members, by the way, not just to someone you don't know.
Who don't even, and that was what I think cleared Jordan Wallace right away, because it sounds crazy that somebody, just called you up and asked you to bring $40,000. Well, you know what? His sister didn't think there was anything wrong. If Sava's sister thinks that everything's okay, well, then of course Jordan Wallace would think that everything is okay.
And his sister who worked with him, it's not like she lived in, San Francisco and they never talked. It's like they worked every day.
Right.
I just keep thinking about the people who were walking by or walking their dog, or the Nellie saying, well, I wasn't planning on coming Friday, but why are you telling me not to come Friday?
Right.
And all of the people who had sort of the opportunity, if you will, to have done something, but they had absolutely no idea, and it's not their fault. They didn't do anything.
Right.
But
wasn't it a sprinkler? Was it a sprinkler or a lawn care service?
There was a lawn care something like that. And even the 2 guys, the gardener and his boss at the Australian embassy, sort of seeing Daron Wynn ducking out of the house, and not thinking anything of it because he's wearing a construction vest, so he's a workman doing work.
It makes you think too. I mean, just all these cases. Every time I go to a case at DC Superior Court, it makes you think about your own life and how protected you are and the decisions you make. But just these split second things that people saw, and the fact that they remembered it and were willing to testify to it, that built this case. Is there anything that you still think about when it comes to this case?
I mean, I think about the families every day. You know these folks for years. I can say I think about the families of most of my victims not every day, but very regularly. And it's just like silly little things, like May of every year, it comes to my mind, like, oh, Mr. Martin and his wife and the Savopoulos grandparents are probably, going to be at the cemetery, or this or that, I know sometimes birthdays, like sometimes it'll hit you on a birthday, like you'll just think, oh my gosh, so-and-so would have been, 16 years old today, or 17 years old today. Right. So those things stay with you.
Yeah, Philip would be in college now.
Right.
In terms of the trial itself, to me, the testimony of the firefighters is still what lingers with me.
Specifically just them describing like those moments where they realized what they had. I mean, because I imagine, and we said this in the podcast, you go to a fire as a firefighter, you're not expecting to find people usually, and especially the way they found them.
Right.
I mean, just honestly, these days, this is something the firefighters talked about. in Northwest DC, you don't go to that many fires. So that itself was unusual. And so, you had the first, team that arrived was actually dealing with the fire, but then you had Michael Ader, who was, shortly behind them on the rescue squad, literally feeling his way around in the absolute pitch darkness until he felt a chair and reached up and felt a face.
Mm-hmm.
And then second body, a third body, and then Corey Getz was the firefighting lieutenant who found Philip, and he thought it was like a frail old woman at first, as he feels like part of a foot as he's crawling through the smoke as well. So it's just that sticks with me, and the way that we presented that testimony and the pictures and some of it at trial.
Right, and at the end of I remember the recording that you played. Again, you were talking before about how you pick a trial partner. We did not do anything with the firefighters. That was all Chris was, oh, I think we should. I'm like, whatever, go find a firefighter. I've got to do this. And, he presented it, I thought, really seamlessly. And, it ends with that final radio broadcast, and he says this is a crime scene.
Yeah, the room on the second floor is a crime scene. Yeah.
Right. And it just sort of, brings you into the moment.
Personally, was this is, I know you guys don't like to tap yourselves on the back, but I mean, was this a career maker? Was this a career milestone, or was there anything about this that sort of made you change directions or say, okay, I'm not a homicide now? Or, I mean, I don't know. It just seems to me like this was such a huge, all-encompassing thing in your lives.
I needed to leave homicide after this. I needed to try and spend a little bit more time focused on my family and have a little bit less death. The fact that Laura has been doing homicides and so many and for so long, she's a legend in the office.
Why do you do it, Laura? Because it's very emotionally taxing.
I don't know. Honestly, I when I meet a family member, I almost feel an obligation. I can tell you this much: it makes you appreciate everything so much more. I tell my kids all the time I love them. I never not tell them that. I mean, my oldest probably gets 15 texts a day from me. And I think that helps you be sort of a better person. Like, I recognize how quick everything can change, and I just have to remember that, and I do remember that. But every family, it's just, as soon as you meet someone, a mother, a father, a sister, at least for me, I feel a connection, and I want to just help them get through it. Mm-hmm. The worst part of our job is that no matter how good we are at it, we don't ever make it better. And to me, that's the hardest thing to come to terms with, because no matter what I do, or no matter how hard I work or how much I sacrifice, I still can't bring anybody back.
Mm-hmm. But you bring justice.
They'd rather have them back.
Thanks to both Chris and Laura for that interview. This podcast was originally written and produced by Jack Moore and me, Megan Cloherty, with Julia Ziegler as our content advisor. I produce the new content for 22 Hours, A Second Look. Thanks for listening. Leave us a review if you've liked the podcast, and you can see the video of my interview with Chris and Laura and learn more about the case at AmericanNightmaresPodcast.com. Music for this episode is Haters Hate by Ramon Messam. 22 Hours, A Second Look is a production of the Gamut Podcasting Network.